Hello, and welcome to my 2-week update of the Kershaw Natrix in copper. I absolutely hate this knife, and I do not want to keep reviewing it. This is the box and the model number, and if you want to see what's in the box, look at the first video. So starting with the bads, per the first video, the knife came sharp as a wet sock out of the box. I am not a sharpener, but I was able to get it so that it will bite quite nicely into wood. And I also have it, again, not a sharpener, where it will cut paper. So that wasn't too big of an issue. If you have a dull knife, you should know how to maintain it, or at least you can just take it to your local shop and get it taken care of. But I did notice the wear and tear in this guy it's falling apart spectacularly quickly. So the problems I have with it is, so let's just flip it open first. So this is, I just finished cleaning and tuning it, and I decided to make a video to show the issues I have with it. If you look at the subframe lock, it's just a flimsy piece of metal, and if you're bearing down, it's very easy to overlock the knife. So that was not a hard press, it's a very light press, and you can unlock it, but if you are doing a really strong hammer grip and your knuckles are digging in, you will overlock the knife very easily. I don't like that. I've never had that on any other frame lock knives I have. I've never seen that happen before, and I think it's just because when I take the knife apart, we'll go through the construction of the subframe lock. It's just not great. The other things is that the subframe lock, so there's a little bit of a flange that will run under the scale here, and that's to prevent hyperextension. So if you're trying to unlock the knife, you can't go past the scale. And that's a nice design, but the problem is that a lot of crud builds up in there if you're using your knife for dirty work. And what that does is it will have your lock bar engaging more firmly with the blade stock, and your action will go from like a nice pleasant crisp press to you're actually pressing very hard, and it almost hurts your finger to get this guy to deploy. So it goes from crisp to hard very quickly. So I found using this knife daily, it takes about 5 days for it to go from fresh, clean, tuned, pleasant knife to I don't want to use it anymore. The other thing the one thing I do like about this knife is the D2 tool steel. It does hold up. There's no chippiness. It holds the edge I put on there. It's just the D2 the blade is very good on this guy. The rest of it I'm not too hot on. The copper, when it patinas, you can patina it many ways. I actually just tried polishing this off a little bit, so it was more dirty penny. So that's what you're going to expect is the highs can still be a little bit polished, and the lows and the crevices are going to get the buildup of grime, and you're going to get that antique copper, antique brass, dirty penny look. So let's take this guy apart, and I'll show you some more bad things about this knife. So what I did do is you usually would need to have 2 T6s to sandwich and then unscrew one side. I put Loctite on one side so that I don't need to do that, since I was taking this knife apart so regularly. I decided to just Loctite this side so that I can very easily take off the show side scale. So comes apart pretty easily now. So it's so that part of the maintenance process is a little bit better, and we can pop off the scale here. So the one thing that did improve over time with this knife is that the bearings were a little bit rough, and they kind of only wanted to go one direction when I just got the knife. Now they're very fluid, and they wore in the brass carrier for these guys. It wore in, and now they roll very smoothly in an omnidirectional way. So the bearings will improve over time. The blade has absolutely no issues, but you will notice that I didn't rub this part off when I was cleaning, but there's a whole bunch of crud here, and I'll show you what that's from. That is from the detent ball. So on my knife, I hope you can see the glint there, that little glint. The D2 tool steel is harder than the Detent ball, and my Detent ball is flattening off and grinding down. So I'm worried that in a long-term use scenario, this guy's not going to have detent anymore. I keep having to tune the knife a little bit more each time and getting it just right so that it will flip to my liking. And I don't like that. Like that, your detent ball is self-destructing. That is the wrong choice of material. I think that for this knife they upgraded to D2 from a slightly softer steel, and I think they just forgot to update the detent in this version of the knife. The other thing I don't like about this knife is this is the manufacturing. So what they've done here is on the lock bar side on my knife, there's 3 washers. On the show side scale, there's 1 washer. So basically, someone made an oopsie on the machining and they set the CNC to drill that a little bit too deep. And instead of fixing it, they just put the knives out there on the market and they shimmed it with a bunch of washers to get it to the right tolerance. That is what it is. It's just they cut a corner instead of making it better. So it doesn't really affect it. It's just a nitpick at that point. And you're saying, well, for the price, it's the price. It's a cheap knife, and it's like, well, for me, it's $100 Canadian, and you can get a Bestech or any number of much better knives for half the cost of this guy. So I don't feel it's a cheap knife thing. I think it's just a poor knife at that point. So it's taking off the subframe lock now, and this is another finicky thing that I've seen a few people on YouTube complaining about. So first I'm going to show you, this is the flange. So let's focus, please. Right, apologies. Let's hold it in my hand. There we go. So here's the flange. So this little piece will build up all sorts of grime and shmoo, and that's the piece that I have to clean out. So there's you can either try running it off underwater, but I'd get such a healthy layer of crud in there that I'd have to fully dismantle the knife and just rub it out with something hard. So that's that. So that's the lock bar, and it is just, compared to like if you have any sort of like a full frame lock design, it's quite a bit thinner, and that's why I'm able to hyperextend the lock. So when this guy was fully together, it is very easy to pull that guy over. So that's just my nitpick. I don't like that. So now that the knife is fully apart, I'm going to start tuning it. So I can get this knife, even when it wears in and starts acting up, it's pretty easy to get back into a working order. So I first start by, I take off the subframe lock, and I get these guys going. So to make sure I'm getting it lined up, so I don't want to strip anything. Good, all right, that's lined up. This is the boring part of the video, apologies for that. So I find that for these 2 screws, if I take them to hand tighten just a tiny bit more than hand tight, that will stiffen up the lock bar, and it makes it so the lock bar can have play up and down, as well as front and back, if you don't tighten all 4 screws up. So in my previous video I mentioned that this guy is a full copper, and if you switch it to be a lefty clip, you're only screwing it to copper. Don't over tighten that, use Loctite. But the other thing that a few other YouTubers have noticed, if you don't have all 4 screws in here, you do get a little bit more play in the lock bar. So this knife really is a right hand only carry for that reason. So now that we have that in there, I'm going to reinstall my pivot. Okay, it's lined up, and I have to seat it. Let's make sure it's fully down. It's pressing on the corner of a wood table, so it's fully seated now. I can take my 3 washers, or 1 washer and 2 shims, put that back in. Right. So there's a stop pin, washer, blade with whatever is left of my detent on it, and then put this bearing on. Good. And I'll put it back together. So yeah, the cleaning disassembly for this guy, it's not hard. It's just that you have to do it so frequently is my main knock against this. Okay, now we're just going to get our pivot started. So yeah, all of these guys have to be snug for it to run proper. And this is the other bit. So actually, I can do it without the. Let's adjust the pivot now. So it's going to be all the way to one side. Make it centered. So it's a bit not great running right now. So it's going to check if it's good when it's fully locked. There's no play. It's gonna. All right, so it was that. So if I press against it, there, the detent is now set, and it will fire properly. So kind of. All right, so I have the detent ball set now in the knife. Now I can put on the clip, and it should fire consistently now that the detent ball is actually set, or the detent nub, it's not a ball anymore. Now that the detent nub is set into the detent hole, it should fire more consistently until the detent ball wears down a little bit more, then I have to redo this. Get that centered. Okay. So this is the part where I find that I have to tighten these guys down quite a bit, and that'll also help just keep the memory for where that's supposed to be, and then knife will fire reliably every time. And even us making very careful, I'm not pushing on there, and it's still firing, it's still crisp, it's still nice, and that'll last for about 5 days. The other thing I don't like about this knife is that the subframe lock is smoothed, it's kind of chamfered up, and I have a very hard time unlocking with my thumb. I find that when I fire, I usually use my finger and I just dig it in for the open close of this knife. The thumb, it does work, but it's just not great. So for all those reasons, I don't really like this knife. It's high maintenance, it's self-destructing over time. There's little things like that the subframe lock, it overlocks, and you can get it back. It's not a well-built knife. There's a lot more compelling arguments for $100. The Ferrum Forged Gent is from Massdrop. It's just heads and tails above this guy, and basically the only thing I like about it is the ergonomics are pretty good, but just the rest of the knife, I found myself reluctant to use it. I'd rather grab pretty much anything else. If I have to scribe material or something, I'd use a screwdriver instead of a knife, because I just don't like using this knife that much. So that's my blunt 2-week review of this knife. There's better options for your money. If you really want something copper in your collection, I would say get a knife you like. Paramilitary 2, ZT 1234, whatever knife you really like, and get aftermarket scales for that knife instead. The argument that, well, you're getting a full knife for $100 versus just scales, but with the other options, you're getting a competent and capable knife in addition to the copper of it. So that's my 2 weeks. We'll see if I will continue for the full month. Leave comments. I don't typically request anything like that, but please leave comments if you prefer me to keep going for the full 30 days. I think it'd be interesting to see if that detent ball completely wears off. That's the only thing I can see. Everything else looks like it'll just keep going. The bearings are good, but I just feel that with continued use, the detent ball is going to self-destruct. So that's the knife. Thanks for your time. Take care. Bye.